Employment and Training Coalition. Today is the third installment in our four-part virtual conference series. We will discuss the role of racial and economic justice in workforce development and our economic recovery. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of sitting down with four experts with diverse perspectives and experiences: Diane Acaba, Wayne Ho, Jerelyn Rodriguez, and Tracy Scott. Thank you to the members and partners and friends that have joined us this afternoon. A special thank you to JPMorgan Chase, Verizon, Google, and all of our sponsors for supporting the NYCETC Conference Series. NYCETC supports the workforce development community to ensure that every New Yorker has access to the skills, training, and education needed to thrive in the local economy, and that every business is able to maintain a highly skilled workforce. NYCETC's membership is composed of 190 workforce providers, education institutions, labor management organizations, and employers that provide job training and employment services to nearly 600,000 New Yorkers. Before we get started, all participants should know that you'll be muted for the duration of this webinar. I'll moderate a discussion with our speakers and discuss the role racial and economic justice has played and should continue to play in supporting workforce development and what will be challenging times ahead for our city, state, and nation. We will then open it up for a few questions from several members and partners. Throughout the conversation, please type your questions along with your name, title, and organization using the chat icon located on the bottom panel. We will unmute you and tee up some guests who have questions so that they may ask the question directly to our speakers on camera. We will try our best to get to as many questions as time will allow. I'll now introduce our speakers, who are incredible individuals leading innovative work in our community at the city, state, and national level. Our first guest, Diane Acaba, is the Assistant Vice President for Policy and Community Engagement for the Hispanic Federation. Next up, we have Wayne Ho, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Chinese American Planning Council and an NYCETC board member. Next, we have Jerelyn Rodriguez, co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Knowledge House, and also an NYCETC board member. And last but not least, Tracy Scott is the Vice President of Workforce Development at the National Urban League. Diana, Wayne, Jerelyn, and Tracy, welcome and thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. Before we get into questions, please take a minute or two to tell us about your work and the role you play in today's topic. And we'll go in alphabetical order. So Diana, why don't you kick us off, followed by Wayne, Jerelyn, and Tracy.
Thank you so much, Jose, and everyone. And yes, alphabetical order, because I think in order of, of the work that we do, everyone, does such tremendous work. Everyone that's here on this panel, and of course, joining this conversation online. Thank you again so much for this opportunity. As Jose mentioned, Diane Acaba, Assistant Vice President for Policy and Community Engagement at the Hispanic Federation. The Hispanic Federation, we're dedicated to empowering the Latino community, and we do that through empowering our organizations, our community organizations that are working on the ground, Latino-led, Latino serving, and of course, working in partnership with, similar-minded groups that are working towards social and racial justice. Like I mentioned, we actually started in New York, so 30 years ago, and I apologize for the background noise, if you can hear that. Just give me one, yeah. It's fine now. So we started in New York about 30 years ago. So bulk of our membership is in New York City, throughout New York State, but we also have a footprint in other states and also in Puerto Rico and an office dedicated to federal advocacy. So, we're really expanding our footprint, but of course, New York is our stronghold, is our base. And a lot of our capacity building and programs stem from the work that we've done for many years in New York, especially the organizational capacity building and technical assistance we provide, advocacy, focusing on a variety of issues, economic empowerment, education, immigration, health, pretty much everything. And then also our direct programming, working again in conjunction with our member agencies and partners, as we expand, again, the work that we're doing to support the Latino community. And just a little bit more about myself, my background was working on our economic empowerment programs, which even though now I'm in a new title, new role, still continues. So again, really appreciate to be part of this conversation because it's really the work that we've been doing, workforce development has been stemming from our overall economic empowerment portfolio, and continuing that work. But I will talk a little bit more about that throughout the panel. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Wayne?
Good morning. Thank you, Joey. Great to see everyone. So I'm Wayne Ho, he, him pronouns with the Chinese American Planning Council. CPC, we are a 56-year-old community-based organization. We are the largest Asian American social services nonprofit organization in the country. We serve over 60,000 New Yorkers of all ages, from children to seniors. Of our 60,000 community members who are being served, over 4,000 every year are served specifically through our workforce development programs. So that includes our summer youth employment programs, as well as our programs targeted towards adults and seniors. So CPC, our mission is to promote the social and economic empowerment of Asian American immigrant and low-income communities. And we do that in the areas of education, seeing it as lifelong, family supports, ensuring that families across generations have the resources they need to thrive, as well as community and economic empowerment. So including our workforce programs and job training. We also do civic engagement, did a lot of work around Census 2020, as well as our policy and advocacy work. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Joey.
Thanks, Wayne. Jerelyn?
Thanks, everyone. My name is Jerelyn Rodriguez. I'm the co-founder and CEO at the Knowledge House. We are a nonprofit that's 7 years old, and our mission is to empower and sustain a talent pipeline of technologists coming from low-income communities. So most of our participants are coming from the South Bronx, but we're a citywide organization. And this year, I'm excited that we will be growing nationally. We offer a year-long job training programs to both youth and young adults, and we focus on code and design skills. So for adults, we primarily place our graduates in data science and web development jobs, and we've achieved that 3 out of 4 of our graduates have achieved their first job in tech after the Knowledge House, and we're excited to keep growing and join the conversation.
Thanks, Jerelyn. And Tracy?
Hi, good morning. No, actually, technically it's afternoon, everybody. My name is Tracy Scott. I'm with the National Urban League. The National Urban League is one of the oldest civil rights organizations in the United States, being founded in 1910. And jobs, for the topic we're talking about today, has been the heart of the Urban League movement since its near inception. Currently today, our workforce development programs span across our 90 affiliates, and we actually serve the entire pipeline of workers in the workforce. So from young adults and youth all the way to mature workers, we have programs that have served specific industries or occupations, whether it's supply chain, technology, or construction itself. A bit about me is that I came to workforce through the education space and doing workforce development there, a bit of homelessness and youth homelessness and workforce, and then coming here to the National Urban League, elevating those issues and other issues at the national level itself. So very excited to have this conversation. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I guess I'm the last person before we get started with the fun stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you all for being here with us again. So let's get started. Today's topic. Historically, the workforce development community has seen itself as an engine for economic justice. And those who are firm believers in that philosophy have often struggled with seeing a place for effective discussions about race and social justice in the workforce development community. The belief is that the sector should be making a case for communities that is purely based on talent. However, there are others who believe the historical mistreatment of people of color is deeply embedded into the fabric of our systems, and that new talent solutions cannot be effectively developed without working to dismantle those barriers. So the first part of the question is, where do you and your organizations fall into this discussion? And when answering, consider how the last year, specifically the impact of COVID-19 on marginalized communities and the recent racial and social justice movement has changed or further cemented your positions in that discussion. So Tracy, since you were the last one to go this past time, why don't you go first this time?
Oh, great. No pressure there kicking us off. Great. Well, listen, the National Urban League is here, and it's been here for over 100 years, is because this issue has been a part of the American fabric, that inequity has been baked in intentionally, and even our efforts to undo it hasn't been complete or successful. And that's the reason why we're having this panel today. That's the reason why we're all passionate about talking about it. Now, if we were to really talk about some of those issues and how they've been exacerbated through COVID-19, let's totally look at numbers. But first, let's appreciate the fact that New York City, right? New York City's unemployment rate is twice that, as of December, is twice that of Indianapolis. Our unemployment rate's 8.4, Indianapolis is at 4%, right? It is not really hard to see why. Some of the industries that have been impacted the most are those that sit within our metropolitan area, those being in entertainment, hospitality, and retail. And if you really look at them at a better lens, and this is the reason why we need to have this discussion on separating out different demographics of the workforce, is that women and people of color and low-income individuals overwhelmingly are represented in those industries. Let me give you a bit of numbers more. In New York City lost 53% of leisure and hospitality jobs, 17% of retail jobs, and 12% of transportation jobs. Of those jobs, 40% of them were held by African Americans. Of those job makers, 49%, almost 50% are held by owners of color, particularly African Americans. But note, when we do break it even further down to gender, we know that 24% of accommodations and hospitality jobs and 12%, 18% of retail and 14% of entertainment were held by women of color. So, you know, if you break it down and you see, it's really been very, very devastating. And I think the overwhelming argument of let's really pay attention to the entire system really perpetuates a bit of this baked in inequity. And we further that equity, we support that equity by just ignoring what those issues are. I'll go on a little bit further and then I'll turn it over to my other panelists on this topic. Listen, you have to ask the question, well, if somebody's out of work, well, they can find another job. But you have to look at where race and income play a factor. Number one, 44% of African Americans do not subscribe or do not have broadband. And a lot of that is because of cost, and some of it is because of universality and portability of a smartphone. How is somebody supposed to complete an online course without a desktop, or to complete an online application if they do not have that access? The other part of those very same jobs that we're talking about that are over-indexed by low income and vulnerable communities, they actually don't have very strong career pathways up and beyond. So if I'm interested in, I'm working as a cashier and I want to get out of this dryer cycle, studies show that I actually will move on to another vulnerable job, because I do not see a very clear, strong pathway to a less vulnerable job or to a different career pathway. And I think those of us in here on this call, everybody on this panel, we're about, and pardon the parlance, we're about that life. That's the reason why we're here. So I'll turn it over to whoever else wants to jump in.
Thanks, Jerelyn. I mean, Tracy, Jerelyn, where does the Knowledge House and you sit in this discussion?
Yeah, I think so. From the start, the Knowledge House has always considered itself an anti-racist and anti-poverty organization. I think for us, we can't just get to economic justice without considering race. And so we have the lived experience of the population that we serve. Me and my co-founder come from the community. We have a low-income background, and we have been successful in providing a safe space to that population that we serve. And so I think you can't not think about race. And especially after COVID, COVID revealed the disparities, right? And so I love how Tracy started with data. COVID shot the unemployment rate in the Bronx to 25%, right? A borough that is mostly Black and brown. Mm-hmm. And so I even remember in the beginning of the pandemic, the workforce development community was concerned because funders thought, well, there aren't jobs, so why would we really prioritize funding workforce development programs? And then a few months after the beginning of COVID, we saw Black and brown people were out of work. They were the ones left out of the economy. And then all of a sudden, economic opportunities for Black and brown people became so important. So I think there has been a shift. I think that now there's too much overlap for us to talk about these things separately. And I think it's building more momentum so that we actually get closer to solving the problem, which is good. And I'll make sure to talk about solutions in the next question.
Sure. Wayne, where does CPC fall in this discussion?
Sure. So, you know, our name as an organization starts with the words Chinese American. So to Jerelyn's point, we've always been from the beginning looking at race and ethnicity as being key to any solutions, and recognizing that a lot of social services had not met the needs of our community. not just Chinese Americans, but Asian Americans who have needs for culturally competent services, language appropriate services. And now during COVID, I think we've seen those needs exacerbated. When under Mayor Bloomberg, when the Center for Economic Opportunity redid the federal poverty measure, I think a lot of people were surprised that the Asian American community of New York City went from the least poor racial group to the most poor racial group, the poorest racial group. And a lot of that is because of how federal poverty measures are calculated. We might have more individuals living in a household, so that skews household income versus per capita income. Unlike other racial groups, our community is actually bimodal. So instead of having just spread out in terms of a bell curve, we actually have two curves in terms of those who, yes, are doing well economically, educationally, and there's those that are underperforming, even relative and in comparison to other racial groups. I want to be clear, I'm not trying to promote Oppression Olympics, just putting out some stats out there. But relevant to COVID, the Asian American community was hit 2 months before other communities were because of having a president calling it the China virus, or the news talking about how the virus came from Wuhan, that Chinatowns and other Asian neighborhoods, we were suffering economically going back to early January, 2 months before the shutdown in New York State. The Asian American community, we had the highest growth of unemployment. It went up over 6,000% in terms of unemployment claims. The Asian American Federation put out some research recently that shows that the sectors that we are in, that the Asian American community is in, are actually the sectors going to take the longest to come back. And some of that Tracy acknowledged. Hospitality, customer service, retail. A lot of these are actually job training programs that we at CPC have run for over 40 years. And my amazing team in workforce development have been transitioning towards rapid employment of our career center because we don't see those job opportunities, unfortunately. We're also part of the Lower East Side Employment Network, where we're working with the development going on the Lower East Side, and the construction jobs and those businesses opening up are obviously affected. And I think that's where, if we are going to have economic justice, we all know that race, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity are all linked to economic opportunity. And that's why we have to have a critical eye on making sure we do lead as an anti-racist organization. We do lead with racial equity, and we need to understand that communities are different. As a nonprofit, I don't want to just put people into any job. I want to put people into jobs that will give them living wages, give them great benefits, have great jobs. And that's why we need to make sure that we recognize the different experiences, the different talents that different communities are bringing to the table. And if we are going to do job training programs and talent development, we need to make sure to take into account the realities of these communities.
Well said. Thank you, Wayne. Diana?
Yes, thank you. I feel that, a lot of the data, the stats, and also the personal experiences shared, resonate so much with us as well. People of color in general, our communities were already disadvantaged before the pandemic. And despite, stats such as, the Latino community having, the lowest unemployment rate, just before the pandemic. But while there were jobs, there were employment, but where, what level? And a lot of those jobs were those jobs that were so vulnerable when the pandemic hit, and also were then, or ultimately deemed essential, but still essential without, the tools needed, right? To be able to face the pandemic, like such as health insurance, the ability to take leave, unemployment insurance, so many of those benefits that, we would consider being, a good job, in addition to, of course, livable wages, etc. So, at the peak of the pandemic, Latino unemployment reached the highest out of all groups at almost 19%, which was the highest rate for any racial ethnic group. And then Latinos have the lowest proportion of workers who are able to telework. So, being able to actually work from home, work remotely, have that connection, and they also work disproportionately in the country's 10 lowest paying jobs, as cashiers, domestic workers, farm workers, et cetera. And these are also jobs that involve direct contact with people. So, again, all of our communities have been vulnerable, but especially, workers in those fields, especially Latinas. A lot of the recent reports sharing, folks that ended up having to, either lost their jobs or had to leave their jobs, were women, Latinas, especially in these vulnerable positions, and caregivers, folks that have family members to take care of, children, et cetera, and had to ultimately make those decisions, or, they were just in those precarious positions that they couldn't, that they didn't have employment. So, as much as we hear about this, on a national level, the Hispanic Federation, we actually engaged in a survey. We released this to the public to gather information on folks on, what have been, sorry for the distractions, what have been issues with regards to employment, especially with due to the pandemic. And from those responses, it really confirmed what we already saw in a lot of these reports and we already could feel and see in our communities. But of the 3,000 responses that we received, 70% reported losing income, over half lost their jobs. And we also saw a big disparity between Spanish language survey respondents and those that took the survey in English. Not assuming that they, just because they took one language over the other meant that, they were just proficient at one language, but there was a big difference between, Spanish language surveys respondents, 80% versus 62%. Had income loss, and 59% versus 30% had job loss. So, that really speaks to the specific needs to all of our different communities and how they need to be addressed. And why at the end of the day, yes, we have to be very, focused, very intentional with regards to the racial and social equity when it comes to workforce development. This was already prior to the pandemic, but even more so with the pandemic, because all of those issues, needs, et cetera, were further exacerbated because of the fact that there were so many disparities prior to that. And I know we're going to talk about, strategies and et cetera. So I'll save some of that for later. But, again, focusing on access to quality jobs, access to training that will help, improve a person's, position, situation. That's something that we have been working on at the Federation through our network of Latino nonprofits. And happy to share that the Knowledge House is part of that network of groups that we've been able to support through a Latino Digital Accelerator, which was actually an initiative that started prior to the pandemic to work with Latino-led nonprofits across the nation. We have 25 nonprofits we're working with that engage in workforce or not necessarily, tech jobs or things of that nature, but are looking to expand their digital skilling and or to have, of course, trainings that can connect folks to those higher paying jobs. And, a lot of the organizations that we worked with, once the pandemic hit, as Jerelyn mentioned, they had to pivot, right? Folks were having, participants come in person and that was a key part of those trainings, and then having to pivot to online, but then also making sure that participants had the resources to be able to join, whether it's connection, the actual equipment, and then again, that understanding, that digital skilling to be able to participate in a training and then of course, the matching that with job opportunities to then be able to take advantage of that training. So, this is something that, we're working on prior. We kept on, talking about, to prepare our community for the future of work. But as we all know, the future of work is now. And the need is more present now more than ever to make sure that our communities have the tools that they need to be able to advance in their careers, but even to be able to access, their basic needs and benefits, considering that, now with the pandemic, we're just that much more increasingly, living online and accessing that information online.
Thanks, Diana. And you started to segue into the next question. So really appreciate all of you setting the stage really well in terms of what you're all organizationally doing and how deeply rooted you are in this challenge. But I'm going to ask Jerelyn and Wayne to start to talk a little bit more about specific strategies or program examples that your organization has developed or are currently partnering on that are working to explicitly break down some of these barriers to hiring talent from communities that we serve. And you already, Diana, started to mention some, but Jerelyn, do you mind talking through some of your examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So since the beginning of the Knowledge House, we realized that even though the data shows that about half of technology jobs don't require a bachelor's degree, companies still were not hiring to meet that new reality, you know? And so I remember like my alma mater, Columbia, every year they used to go to the campus and hire 30 engineers, right? Like I had a conversation with Microsoft in the early years and I asked them, I know that you go to Stanford and the Ivy Leagues to hire talent, but would you ever partner with a CUNY? Would you ever partner with a CUNY in the Bronx? And they said, well, they're not on our partner list, right? This was 7 years ago. And so literally we have had to wait. It's like a domino effect, right? Because traditionally these corporations hire from elite schools. At first they were not hiring from CUNY, and now because they're hiring for diversity and slowly getting there, now they have partnered with CUNY. But it means that for Knowledge House students that don't go to CUNY or aren't on a college track, they still don't have access to those opportunities. And so we can't wait. I love that Diana said like the future of work is now. So what we've been doing is meeting companies where they're at. What we do know is that companies love volunteering and they love marketing initiatives. And so the past year, we've been integrating industry professionals, industry best practices into our training program. And so the program is 1 year long. Every job trainee has a mentor that has volunteered at the Knowledge House, and they are an industry professional that's supporting them the whole program. And not only does that allow us to support the student, but the volunteer and their employer gets to know our talent, know the curriculum, give us feedback on the curriculum. And as we are getting close to job matching, we even get like HR assessments from these volunteers so that we know exactly what their company's hiring needs are. And we can even backwards engineer to know that the curriculum meets those needs. And so that is what leads to hiring, like more engagement, more partnerships with the corporations, especially after the George Floyd moment this summer. Companies wanted to invest in racial equity. And so last year we launched this campaign so that we can support 100 emerging Black and Brown technologists in the Bronx. And literally we designed it to respond to corporations. So we asked corporations to sponsor a student and donate technology, donate hotspots to the students and donate dollars so that we can provide our students with cash assistance. That provided them with like immediate gratification, right? Like, okay, we are helping these job trainees persist through the pandemic. And then we recruited volunteers and we held like a whole volunteer day with like Ernst & Young, for example, where 30 of their professionals provided interview prep to our students. And all of these opportunities in the long term lead to hiring. So we've already had some of our sponsors take on folks. We have them interviewing our job trainees early. And so it's meeting them where they're at, because we're not going to wait until they create a program for non-college students. We're going to keep convincing them, and we're going to show them the talent is here, get to know them and hire them. And then slowly but surely the systems change will come and it'll all be more sustainable.
That's great. Wayne?
So I'll rip a page off from David Garza from Henry Street, who likes to alliterate and rhyme, but I'll talk about three practices, programs, and partnerships. So in terms of practices, I think it's important for New York City's human services nonprofit sector to better own the fact that we ourselves are employers, that we ourselves are an economic engine. I think oftentimes we know the city of New York and the state of New York, who, when we do a lot of contracting, they forget that we are a large part. I think we're nearly 20% of all jobs actually come through the nonprofit sector in New York. So we at CPC, through our diversity, equity, and inclusion work that we've been doing the last couple of years, but it definitely ramped up over the last year, is that we've been looking at our own requirements on who joins us and how do we recruit and how do we make sure that folks coming to us, it's no longer just about the credentials they have, the skills they have, the educational background they have, recognizing that certain programs that we run require that, early childhood education, some of our social work positions, But there's a lot of positions where we are really now looking for fits. We're looking for people who support organizational values, folks who understand to be anti-racist, individuals who can speak different languages and recognize that CPC serves not only Chinese Americans, but we serve other communities of color and other immigrant communities. So we also were fortunate that, so we've been changing up our practices, and I think we were fortunate that while we did have budget cuts like many people did in 2020, we were fortunate to be one of the few CBOs to get resource navigator contracts from the city of New York to help folks who test positive for COVID, as well as new contracts at family childcare networks. So we were actually able not only to just save some jobs of CPC staff who might have been furloughed or laid off, but we also made sure that we wanted to hire as diverse as possible because, for example, with resource navigators and family childcare networks, these are citywide programs. They're not just in the neighborhoods that CPC has traditionally been in, which are predominantly Chinese American and Asian American neighborhoods. To programs, just some programs to highlight. This is obviously not exhaustive, but one is we are fortunate to have a Title V program that serves seniors who are looking to re-enter the workforce. We've targeted our Title V programming towards seniors who are immigrants, who English might not be their first language. So as we're training them through our Title V program, in addition to job skills and getting them job placements, we make sure to include English literacy classes. We make sure to educate them more to be more culturally competent in working in New York City. But it's been, we work with hundreds and hundreds of seniors every year to train them up and help them get permanent jobs. Through our program of customer service training, we've also been working with parents who have been out of the workforce for years for various reasons, but targeting these parents to bring them back into the workforce. Obviously, customer service trainings are on pause right now for us, but I think historically we've had a great track record of targeting parents who have been out of the workforce, but making sure that they understand what's needed now for them to get better jobs. And then last P, in terms of partnerships, we are part of the Lower East Side Employment Network. So all of us in the Lower East Side working together for 10 plus years, recognizing that there has been a lot of development and a lot of construction and a lot of businesses coming into the Lower East Side. And us individually might not be able to fill these job orders, but if we all work together on recruitment opportunities, work together on screening, work together on job training, that we're able to leverage all the different partnerships we might have with new employers or existing employers, signing MOUs with them to make sure that there's a certain funding floor or wage floor for potential employees, and making sure that there's opportunities for Lower East Side residents to be employed in these new jobs and these new businesses that are coming into our neighborhoods. And I think that these are what's important for us, is that internally improving our practices, and then programmatically in terms of partnerships, making sure that we are targeting different communities as much as possible to make sure they can have employment opportunities.
Thanks, Wayne. Tracy?
Sorry, almost did a rookie mistake there. I will couch my response under two sort of buckets. One is looking at, we really need to lead with data, real-time data on how do we engage. And the second bit is that we have to look at movement, right? And movement of folks so it's no longer butts and seats. So I'll start with the butts and seats. It's not enough that there is an opening and we just want to put people in a job. Mm-hmm. Because what we're seeing is that there's a pooling. So, Jerelyn brought up a topic very close to my heart of tech and finding entry-level positions of tech. But if you actually look at the EEOC numbers, you will see that people of color stay at the entry level, maybe at a manager's level. They don't move up. It literally drops by double-digit percentages. There needs to be a bit of movement there. So some of the things that we're working on with the National Urban League is that we are focusing in on upskilling. So it's not just somebody who's out of work. How do we help those who are underemployed and incumbent, those people who are employed, get connected to advancing their learning? We as an entire society, we as a workforce community need to really advance our conversation and start talking about how do we ensure that the people that come back to the workforce once we get this pandemic under whatever control we can, that they're not going back to those very same vulnerable positions that are just waiting for the next economic tsunami to wipe them out. We have to have a very aggressive approach to doing that. Upskilling is one way to do it. The second bit is using real-time data. We all love to use labor market index as it, which is great, but note that is really helpful for established industries. It is not really helpful for emerging industries that are coming in. And so for that, having access to burning glass data is an affordable access to things like burning glass data is helpful, so that we as workforce counselors and business developers know exactly who's hiring, what do they need right now in your community. Why is it that for those of us that serve low-income unemployed individuals have to wait for 2 years of data in order to be able to activate on it, when those that do have the financial access to get to it? So that's where we're working on now, of finding the jobs where they are, working with affordable data analysts to give us information about what jobs are there. I'll give an empirical example. We have a partnership with Penn Foster, which is an online training provider. They gifted to us vouchers for their healthcare institute. So for contact tracer, patient transporter, which is really great. But I said it has to go to those particular areas where people are hiring, right? So it's not just simply, here's the greatest need, Chicago's really great, New York's really great, but if nobody's hiring, and I think we need to talk about that as an industry or as a group, if people are not hiring, if there's not enough jobs, we could be sending people to get training all along. And in the end, all we're doing is we're re-inviting trauma for them. Great, I went through and spent all this time to get educated and there's no job for me. So that's where we are on just sort of jumping ahead to create that space, engaging in conversations with philanthropic partners, employer partners, education partners, and then also in the data analytics to ensure that we are being ahead of the curve, that we're not allowing us all to fall back into the same tropes.
Thanks, Tracy. And Diana, you started off the last question, you ended with a couple of solutions. Is there anything else that you want to throw in there?
I mean, just listening to everyone speak, you know, I'm just nodding the whole time, because I feel like these are our conversations that, you know, we're also having at the Hispanic Federation with a lot of our partners too. We actually, I mentioned the survey that we had shared with our community, but in conjunction with that, we also organized focus groups with a number of nonprofit organizations, community leaders across many footprints. We also had one dedicated just to New York City, in which Jose, you were a participant there. And thank you again for your contribution to that conversation. And from that, reflecting on those survey results, you know, bringing together all these, you know, community leaders to discuss the findings and to discuss how groups have had to pivot in service delivery, and also what are solutions, focusing on work, food, and shelter. But as you can imagine, the work conversation was, you know, really the bulk of what we discussed there, and coming up with programs and policy recommendations, which I know we're going to talk about policy as well in a bit, but you know.
Yeah. Why don't you hold off on the policy recommendations for a second?
So I'll hold off on that. but I just did want to share that, you know, I wanted to talk to about you know, the upskilling, you know, the making sure that the investments that are happening in our communities, that it's including the community members, you know, if there's going to be, you know, like as Wayne mentioned, you know, in Lower Manhattan, but in other parts of the city, if there's going to be, you know, investments for, you know, industries or new companies, you know, expansions, et cetera, you know, how can our communities be involved in that? You know, what can we do to make sure as, you know, as nonprofit leaders, as also coalition builders, you know, what can we do amongst our organizations to make sure that we're providing the services that our community needs to be able to access these opportunities? And with, of course, the digital accelerator, you know, how can we make sure that our organizations have what they need to do that? You know, whether it is funding, you know, the technical assistance, you know, with the digital accelerator, we're providing a curriculum for those groups that don't have one. Of course, Knowledge House is an amazing curriculum. So, you know, the work that we're doing, Knowledge House, you know, they're already a leader with regards to that, but making sure that, again, like you said, not just providing training for training's sake, making sure that it's relevant for where folks are, addressing any gaps that exist too as well, you know, for folks to be able to obtain that knowledge, but then of course, connection to actual job opportunities. And also for folks who are currently employed, if they're looking to increase their skills and to be able to access, you know, other opportunities, higher pay opportunities, et cetera, to be able to provide those tools as well.
Thanks, Diana. And just in your opinion, how can public policy be more effectively used to support the workforce development community? And obviously this is a core focus area of our organization, the work that we do here, and folks on this call are obviously very interested in hearing that. In your work, what initiatives, agendas, platforms have you seen that are adequately addressing the issue in traditional or you know, new and innovative ways? And I'm going to ask Tracy, if you can kind of set the stage for us a bit on this question, especially what's happening at a national level or in any areas that you're covering.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Obviously, this is our space where we like to swim. There's a bit, and the theme for it will be, we need to strengthen and expand the workforce ecosystem. And what I mean by that is, for one, we can have, we really need to look at connecting the Child Care Block Grant and the Child Care and Development Grant, because the number one reason why women have left the workforce is because of childcare. And what's happened, particularly in urban areas, are that many of the people that we serve do not work a regular 9 to 5, yet the majority of childcare providers are open from 9 to 5. Those that work the third shift or second shift, there really is no childcare that's available for it. There's a lot that can be done to expand and incentivize for there to be more childcare providers, but also being available and open for non-traditional working hours to help accommodate those that are working and those that are going back to school. Another one is that there should be a looking at transportation and urban planning. Many of the public transportation services that go to colleges do not always operate at the time frame of school. So a lot of evening classes end at 9 p.m. And those individuals that live in urban areas, oftentimes they live in high crime areas. So that's a deterrent if there's not more frequent routes, more direct routes to connect people who are in class to make it home safely. And if not, then I think there's an opportunity for a public partnership idea or initiative, almost like we have the Safety Sams during St. Patrick's Day or New Year's Eve, something like that with rideshare, so that folks can have a safe ride home. We haven't really talked about the issues for youth. Guidance counselors are way underfunded and overworked. The average rate should be 1 to 140. It's actually 1 to 250. And if we're talking about urban communities such as the South Bronx, where you are, Jerelyn, it's even more abysmal. If guidance counselors don't have access to youth and don't have knowledge of training opportunities such as apprenticeships, which are really great entryway for many young adults, those who are returning citizens, then how would somebody know that that opportunity is available? They need to be brought into the fold and be educated on the availability of opportunity. Let's talk about Pell Grants. Pell Grants are usually connected to established higher education training. We're seeing that there is a juxtaposition between short-term training credential programs, which are much more amenable to somebody who's low income, long time unemployed, or somebody who just doesn't have 2 semesters, 4 semesters to give to get a credential. But if I can get a credential that makes it available for me to get a tech job or for me to work in healthcare manufacturing, I should be able to do it. But I can't right now, the way the policy is, I cannot access Pell Grant. I can't access Pell Grant money to help offset that cost. We need to push at the national level of really reimagining the Pell Grant, and now's the time to be able to do it. I'm almost done. We can really take a model called the Trade Adjustment Assistance, which was really designed for those who were displaced in the employment and import and export industry. That needs to be expanded to everyone. And that is actually being supported. Gallup just released a report yesterday that showed that overwhelmingly bipartisan, I think it's like 98%, both Republicans and Democrats, of all the things we talk about pollaring, this we all agree on, of people being able to work part-time while getting their credential the remaining amount of time, and that time being paid. That is absolutely important for people who are looking for work. People do not have time to wait a year before they can get a paycheck. They need to get a paycheck now. And if you don't do it, they're going to drop out of their education opportunity and still stay in that dead end job. That needs to be. And the final bit is that there is a best practice out in California, that in California, I'll talk about Los Angeles, that their city runs their unemployment, their America Jobs Center, but the state operates your entitlement programs like SNAP and WIC. What they do in California is that they are co-located in the same space. This is really pivotal for those who have become disconnected. Those people have dropped out of the workforce that are no longer looking for it. It's really hard for career counselors to stay in touch and find those people whose unemployment insurance has exhausted and they've completely dropped out. But many of those people are still receiving public assistance. If those two agencies can talk, that is a way for a career counselor or job person, business developer saying, we've got jobs that are available. Can we connect with the entitlement programs to find those people, to let them know, hey, come back, there's a job for you.
Mhm. Thank you. It was really helpful. Wayne, Jerelyn, what do you think, bringing it back to the city for a second, what can we be doing better here in the city to address this challenge?
So I will take this question from the human services nonprofit perspective. And I thank Tracy for listing everything. And then I didn't know there's a world beyond New York City. So thanks for bringing up California, my home state. So I think first, it's always important to realize, and to connect it to your first question about race and racial justice with economic justice, we need to realize with the city and the state's contracting process and procurement process, and then how philanthropy works, that there has to be more accountability to what they're doing around promoting racial justice. And it's been great in the last year that there's been more eyes about more money going towards Black and Brown communities and promoting criminal justice reform and other issues. But the reality is what they're investing has been a drop in the bucket. So I'm sure Diana can go into stats on the Latino community, but in the Asian American community, less than 1% of New York City's human services contracts go to the Asian American nonprofits. Less than 2% of philanthropic dollars go to Asian American nonprofits. So right away, the fastest growing community in New York as Asian Americans at 15% are not getting a fair share. And this is common for Black and Brown community-based nonprofits as well in our city. So I think the first one is we need to make sure that city procurement, state procurement, and philanthropic dollars also take a racial equity lens, take a racial justice lens, and make sure there's more equitable funding coming to our communities and to the nonprofits that are from these communities, with these communities, hired in these communities. Secondly, I think some of the new partnerships that we've seen are good starts, making sure that CUNY partners with nonprofits around apprenticeships, making sure there's more investment in bridge and skill building. But once again, who are the community-based organizations that are being part of this? And I want to be clear, the CBOs that have been selected are great CBOs. I would say we just need to expand the pie to make sure that CBOs that are, once again, from communities of color, from immigrant communities, born and bred from LGBTQ communities and other marginalized communities are also part of these partnerships. It's also good that we do have some new policies out there, whether it's the city trying to make sure we do more business with MWBEs, or there's now legislation out there around community hiring. But as we all know, oftentimes when the city and state put forward legislation, they really don't know how this will impact nonprofits whose business models and funding models are different. Simply put, if you want us to do something that is good, which more contracting with MWB is good, more community hiring is good, you need to make sure that our contracts are amended and adjusted to give us the funding to make that happen. So if you want to raise the minimum wage, give me more money to pay the minimum wage, because I can't raise the price of goods when I'm offering free services. So I think that's where we just need to make sure there's a lens towards what nonprofits go through. Last but not least, I just want to offer that, once again, CBOs, nonprofits, we're about 20% of the workforce in New York State. And what is the state and what is the city doing to make sure there's equitable jobs? We know that the vast majority of our frontline staff are people of color, women of color, immigrants, who, if they're compensated, that money goes right back to their families, right back to the neighborhoods where they live, work, worship, and play. And that's where we need to make, it's a problem when New York State has a statute, the human services contracts must have a cost of living adjustment every year so we can provide a COLA to our employees who are state contracted. But we have a governor who has refused to acknowledge that statute his entire time in office. It's a problem when the minimum wage is increased and we don't see those contract adjustments from the state, but we did see those at the city, fortunately. It's a problem that we are contracted and limited at the city level on what I can pay my ACS child welfare preventive workers. And after they work with me for 2 years, they're recruited away to a job at ACS itself because ACS pays their caseworkers better, gives them a pension and gives them better benefits. But my contracts don't allow that. So we need to make sure that if we're really going to deal with this tale of two cities, we're going to have an equitable recovery, that a simple way to do that is stop investing in the NYPD and more over policing of our communities where they could take a slight hit in their budget and we can just invest those in communities and make sure that those of us on the front lines of serving the communities, providing relief, providing recovery, meeting the needs of our communities during these toughest times and have been essential workers throughout, that we can pay our workers equitably. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Wayne. And we're running against time, so I'm actually going to pause there for now and start to call up just a couple people up who have some questions. And so just bear with us because we actually bring them up to physically ask the question virtually on the platform directly to you. So our first question is coming from Leonie Gordon, the director at the Jewish Community Council of Greater Coney Island. Leonie, whenever you're ready. And you're on mute right now, so you'll need to come off. There we go.
All right. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much. This has been a very valuable experience in terms of presentation and as well as information and content. I asked a question in reference to the idea of this new shift in paradigm of equity, but in terms of making it more sustainable, because it's one thing to say we need a change. The repetitive action is that this change is not affirmed by the institutions or even the government policies that say it's important. So in hearing, I think it was Wayne Ho and many of you speak, it's the requirements, what's going on at the city level with the contracts, what's going on at employer services to say that, you know, we want to help in terms of skills and building them, but what are we doing when we say that you have to have a certain degree? So I just wanted to really hear that sort of, how do we hold those individuals who are responsible for the funding streams and who are responsible for ensuring we reach these goals if they're not willing to provide the service and really speak true to form or speak truth to power? So I just wanted to ask that question.
Thank you for the question. Anyone want to jump in?
I would just jump in quickly. I think that there's a lot of existing advocacy efforts. You know, NYCETC is doing its advocacy efforts, Human Services Council, FPWA, United Neighborhood Houses, et cetera, to, you know, New York Immigration Coalition, Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. Long story short, I think there's a lot of advocacy efforts out there to not just make sure there's restorations of human services, but also make sure there's more equity now, which I think is a great opportunity for us to make sure that those umbrellas that serve immigrant communities and communities, oh, I'm sorry, Hispanic Federation, what Diane is doing, my bad. But I think that there's a lot of advocacy efforts. I think the tougher conversation is actually not with elected officials. I think the tougher conversation is with philanthropy. And we need to have open, honest conversations. You know, a recent funder told us that they have a strategic plan where the job development we need to provides people jobs at least $65,000 a year. That's going to leave out a lot of the immigrant communities that we've been serving, because where are those jobs? But also the grant they're giving me to do that is not paying my own staff $65,000 a year. But I think these are the tough conversations we're going to need to have with philanthropy, not just with elected officials and government officials.
Thanks, Wayne. Our next question is from Yazeli Ortiz. Yazeli is a program specialist at CUNY's LaGuardia Community College. Whenever you're ready.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this panel. So my question is maybe a little bit more personal. Some of you may have mentioned that you're going national or that you serve populations outside New York City, New York, like Puerto Rico. And I wonder how you all are able to consolidate providing services to that huge population in need in New York, and also a huge population of in need outside of New York. I personally, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm born and raised Puerto Rican, I'm working in LaGuardia, I'm committed to providing services to New York City population, but I'm also very worried about what's going on in Puerto Rico with the pandemic, the earthquakes, the hurricane, all that stuff, specifically economic development and the digital divide issues. So do you have any suggestions, any information, like how do you think that intersects in this matter? And any comments on this? Thank you.
Thank you. Diana, do you want to jump in?
I was just going to say, I'd be happy to take that because it speaks to the work that the Hispanic Federation is doing and is continuing to do and expand in, especially since we do have an office in Puerto Rico that opens after Hurricane Maria and all the efforts that we were able to engage in there with immediate relief, but also strategic nonprofit investments and also organizing and supporting the nonprofit sector on the island, and also, you know, advocating for issues just like what you mentioned. So stemming to what I mentioned before about the focus groups that we were able to coordinate to reflect on the survey that we have put out, which we also included Puerto Rico in that, and we had a number of respondents from Puerto Rico, bringing together also community nonprofit representatives, but also community leaders from Puerto Rico. So these are folks that a lot of them are like their leader from their community. They're not necessarily a nonprofit employee per se. These are people that are organizing within what, you know, their different, you know, housing communities or what have you. So we had a great mix of folks there. And of course, workforce, economic empowerment, bridging the digital divide, all the things that you mentioned were top issues that were discussed. And we'll be releasing that report very soon, where we're going to share all the findings from the survey, the focus groups, and all those recommendations, as I mentioned. But for us, it's very important to, obviously, the work that we do here in New York, this being, you know, the base where we started, but also working with the diaspora and then working with folks on the island directly, and also working with organizations just like CUNY and similar organizations to work together on these issues. So I would be happy to continue the conversation and introduce you with some of my colleagues on the island, because I know that they too, you know, they have a very robust advocacy and policy agenda on the island, particularly that also includes some of these issues. So I'm happy to continue the conversation, but just know that that is something that is top of mind for us, that we recognize that there's a lot of, you know, connection there that needs to be addressed. And, you know, being in New York as well and having the resources we have here, the relationship with the island, you know, we are a leader too, with the work that we do here within the city, and that can serve as a model to then, you know, collaborate and work together with other, you know, other states, other regions, and Puerto Rico.
Thanks, Diana. And thank you to the entire panel. There are so many more questions that I want to ask and so many more questions that our guests would love to ask, but we've run out of time as usual. So that concludes our panel discussion today. Diana, Wayne, Jerelyn, and Tracy, thank you so much for this incredible conversation and sharing your diverse perspectives, experiences. I know that our members and partners have found it incredibly valuable. We really appreciate you taking this time to be with us. And we look forward to working with you to advocate for our shared vision and priorities. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
Everyone.